Before sunrise, she arrived with one suitcase and nowhere else to go. The gate recognized her fingerprint.
The previous night, her husband had forced her out after she refused to risk their apartment for his failing company.
You have permission to enter now.
Estate attorney Mira placed 7 brass keys in Naomi's hand and explained that the will
Inside,
would not be read until 10.
The house still remembered its owner.
His mother's slippers remained perfectly aligned beneath the entrance bench.
Of all 42 rooms, this was the only one she could accept.
By noon, Jiho would believe that 7 years of caregiving had been a strategy to steal his inheritance. Naomi would have to decide whether to accept a mansion that could destroy her marriage, expose the family's deepest wound, and demand more from her than it gave. To understand why those gates opened for her,
This house was left to you as a responsibility.
we must return to the morning when one ordinary act of care became a lifetime of responsibility. At 6:12 on a gray Seoul morning, Naomi Carter-Park stood outside Haneul House with one suitcase and nowhere else to go. The 42-room Gangnam mansion stood between towers of glass, valued at nearly $40 million. Naomi knew because she had prepared its conservation report. Now the gate recognized her fingerprint. Mira, the estate attorney, waited beneath the entrance lantern and offered her 7 brass keys and an electronic fob. Mrs. Park instructed that you enter alone, she said. Does Jiho know? He knows the will is being read at 10. He does not know you have immediate occupancy. 18 hours earlier, Naomi had arranged Park Sun-hee's funeral flowers. 12 hours earlier, her husband had ordered her out. Now his family mansion was opening its gates to her. Naomi accepted the keys. The entrance hall smelled of cedar and Sun-hee's medicinal tea. Her slippers remained beneath a bench, both heels perfectly aligned. Naomi looked away. She passed the master bedroom and a library larger than the apartment she had shared with Jiho for 9 years. At the end of the west corridor, she opened the smallest door. The caregiver's room held a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and one window facing a brick wall. Naomi set down her suitcase. Of all 42 rooms, this was the only one that did not feel stolen. The previous night, their apartment had been crowded with condolence baskets. Jiho stood at the kitchen counter, black tie loose, 3 bank alerts glowing on his phone. He asked Naomi for her personal seal. She refused. My company has 11 days before the bridge loan is called, he said. My mother knew that, you knew it. She was sedated when you brought those transfer papers. I asked for a signature, not a judgment. You asked me to help take her house when she could barely hold a cup. Jiho's face tightened. Every time I tried to speak with her, you were already there. For 7 years, Naomi had measured Sun-hee's medicine, washed her hair, changed dressings, and learned which soup she could swallow. Jiho had called it kindness when it cost him nothing. Now he made it sound like strategy. You think I cared for her to get this house? I think my mother trusted you with everything she denied her own son. For 1 second, his anger looked exactly like grief. Then he placed Naomi's suitcase beside the door. I can't look at you without seeing what she chose, he said. Go. Naomi waited for him to take it back. He lowered his eyes. The bank alert flashed again. She packed clothes, her passport, and Sun-hee's sewing kit. She left her drafting tools because her hands shook too badly to carry them. At the elevator, Jiho said her name. Naomi turned. He gripped the doorframe, but his apology did not survive his pride. The doors closed between them. Now in the caregiver's room, Naomi sat on the narrow bed while Mira remained at the door. If the will says what you implied, Naomi said, Jiho will believe I manipulated her. The will is only one document. What else is there? A preservation covenant, care records, recorded instructions, all independently witnessed. Naomi glanced at the suitcase. Why would she leave this to me? Mira entered and shut the door, closing 41 silent rooms behind her. Before the reading, understand one thing. Park Sun-hee did not leave you this house as a reward. She placed a sealed folder on the dresser. She left it as a responsibility, and if you accept it, Haneul House may take more from you than it gives. The first page in Seomira's folder was not a deed. It was a care schedule. 5:40 a.m. appeared beside hundreds of dates in Naomi's handwriting. Some entries listed medicine, meals, or appointments. Others contained only 2 words, bad night. 7 years earlier, Naomi had been 32 and close to leading her first major restoration. The Bukchon residence had old timber hidden beneath a false ceiling. She had spent 11 years earning the right to make the final decisions. Then Park Sun-hee fell on the west staircase at Haneul House. Jiho called the arrangement temporary. 6 weeks, perhaps 8, until his mother trusted professional help. Naomi moved her site visits, learned Sun-hee's medicine schedule, and began arriving before the housekeeper. Every morning at 5:40, her alarm vibrated beneath her pillow. Jiho often woke long enough to say, "You don't have to do all this." Then he closed his eyes while Naomi dressed in the dark. 6 weeks became a season. The season became a year. At first, Sun-hee treated care like an invasion. She corrected the temperature of her tea, rejected the cane beside her chair, and spoke to Naomi through Jiho. "Tell your wife I don't need help with my buttons," she said over the phone. Naomi fastened the final button. "Tell your mother she has been wearing that jacket backward for 10 minutes. Sun-hee laughed and had to sit down. After that, they spoke directly. Sun-hee taught Naomi to identify old Rami cloth by touch. Naomi showed her where rain traveled behind the carved eaves. They still argued. Sun-hee believed age entitled her to secrecy. Naomi believed privacy ended where danger began. Naomi learned that Sun-hee wanted the west curtains open before sunrise. She also learned that the older woman disliked sympathy more than pain, and that silence was sometimes more useful than reassurance. Jiho saw the results, not the routine. His mother was calmer. The appointments were managed. To him, Naomi had a gift for caregiving. To Naomi, it was work performed with love, which did not make it less costly. Her firm reassigned the Bukchon residence after she missed 3 structural inspections. A promised leadership role disappeared. When Naomi said she could no longer be the person who was always available, Jiho looked confused. "She won't accept anyone else," he said. "You're the only one she trusts. That is not the same as asking what I can afford to give." Jiho promised to help. For several weeks, he came on Wednesday evenings. Then lenders began calling, and Wednesday quietly returned to Naomi. The most important work she did there began after Sun-hee found her measuring a damaged wall in the West Wing. "You are not employed as my architect," Sun-hee said. "I'm not employed as anything." Sun-hee considered that, then handed her the old floor plans. Naomi started drawing after the evening medicine. She mapped how the unused wing could be made accessible without destroying its original timber. She designed private rooms, a shared kitchen, a fabric workshop, and a separate garden entrance. Sun-hee studied each revision as carefully as a textile pattern. "Who would stay here?" she asked. "People who spend their lives caring for someone else," Naomi said. "People who have forgotten what a full night of sleep feels like." Sun-hee offered no praise. The next morning, she returned the drawings covered in precise notes. Months later, during a rainy evening when Jiho had canceled dinner again, Sun-hee locked those plans inside her desk. "Do not show him yet," she said. "He is your son. This house matters to him. That is the problem." Sun-hee rested one hand beside her silver voice recorder. "Jiho has spent his life using property to answer a question I was too proud to answer myself." Naomi waited. Sun-hee's voice softened. "Whatever happens to Haneul House, never let him turn it into proof that I loved him." Sun-hee's warning about the house made little sense to Naomi until 3 months before her death, when Jiho arrived at Haneul House, carrying a leather folder and 2 cups of coffee no one had requested. His development firm had spent 4 years converting neglected buildings into small residential properties. Jiho had once refused projects that erased local history. Recently, however, a contractor's collapse had frozen his largest project. 23 employees were waiting for salaries. Suppliers were demanding payment, and Jiho had personally guaranteed more debt than Naomi knew. He did not tell her any of that at first. He unfolded architectural drawings across Sun-hee's dining table. A shaded section covered the mansion's eastern garden, service courtyard, and textile workshop. A 25-year ground lease, he explained. The house remains yours. My firm develops only the unused land. Naomi studied the drawings. The proposed underground parking entrance cut through the original stone wall. The caregiver entrance she had designed disappeared beneath a luxury apartment lobby. Sun-hee adjusted her glasses. How much does your lender require? Jiho hesitated. 7 billion, won in secured value. That was not my question. It would release enough credit to finish the Mapo project. And if it fails? Jiho's hand tightened around his cup. It won't. Sun-hee pushed the drawings back. He returned the following week with revised numbers. Then again with a property advisor. Each visit ended the same way. Sun-hee asked what would happen if the company failed, and Jiho answered as though doubt itself were an insult. One night, Naomi found him sitting in their parked car beneath the apartment building. His forehead rested against the steering wheel. She opened the passenger door. How bad is it? He gave a tired laugh. Bad enough that everyone suddenly speaks very slowly when they call me. Jiho finally showed her the accounts. The ground lease was not merely an opportunity. It was the last asset large enough to persuade the lender to wait. I have people who followed me out of stable jobs, he said. One signature protects all of them. One signature puts your mother's home behind your company. She has $40 million in property and uses 12 rooms. It is still hers. Jiho looked toward the windshield. You sound exactly like her. The next morning, Sun-hee's pain medication was increased. Jiho arrived while she drifted in and out of sleep. He placed a revised agreement beside her bed and guided a pen toward her hand. Naomi removed the document. She agreed to consider it, he said. She cannot understand it in this condition. You are not her attorney. No, I am the person watching you ask a sedated woman for control of her land. Jiho stepped into the corridor and lowered his voice. Do you understand what happens if this loan is called? Then tell me. Don't make her confusion carry the answer. He stared at Naomi as if she had crossed from wife to opponent. Sun-hee refused the agreement when she was fully alert. Jiho left without saying goodbye. After that, the marriage changed in small, precise ways. Jiho stopped discussing his company at home. Naomi stopped asking why he came to bed after midnight. Each believed the other had chosen Sun-hee's side, but Jiho had not stopped trying. 2 weeks later, he asked Naomi to persuade his mother privately. When she refused, he suggested that Sun-hee's declining health made Naomi responsible for protecting the family's future. You are the only person she listens to, he said. That does not give me the right to choose for her. Convenient. You influence every decision, then pretend you have no power. The accusation stayed between them. On the night after the funeral, Jiho needed a different signature. Without Sun-hee's agreement, he planned to pledge the apartment he and Naomi owned together. Her registered seal was required. That was why the suitcase appeared beside the door when she refused. At Haneul House, Sun-hee has understood the resentment long before Naomi did. A week after rejecting the ground lease, she called Naomi into the textile room. The silver voice recorder sat on the table, with its red light glowing. Jiho believes you have placed yourself between us, Sun-hee said. Have I? You stand where I left an empty space. Naomi reached toward the recorder. Should this be running? Yes. For what? Sun-hee switched it off, placed it inside her pocket, and handed Naomi a sealed envelope. I have an appointment Thursday morning. I need you away from the house for 2 hours. With whom? My attorney. Naomi recognized Seo Mira's name on the envelope. "What are you planning?" Sun-hee looked through the window at the eastern garden Jiho wanted to lease. "For once," she said, "I am going to make a decision my son cannot mistake for love." Sun-hee died 5 weeks after meeting Seo Mira. Her final morning was quiet. Naomi opened the west curtains at 5:40, prepared tea, and waited for an argument that never came. Sun-hee's silver recorder rested beside her bed, its red light dark. By the funeral, Jiho had transformed into efficiency. He selected the burial clothes, approved the flowers, thanked every guest, and bowed with perfect control. Naomi handled the details he overlooked. Sun-hee's favorite ivory jacket, the damaged family photograph, the rami cloth placed beside her hands. When an elderly textile artist embraced Naomi and whispered, "She trusted you more than anyone," Jiho heard. His expression did not change, but he released Naomi's hand. That evening, condolence baskets crowded their apartment. Jiho stood at the kitchen counter with his tie loosened and 3 bank notices glowing on his phone. "Your seal," he said. Naomi removed her shoes. "For what?" "The apartment." He wanted to pledge their home as security. Without Sun-hee's land, it was the last asset available before his lender called the loan. "You said we would discuss that after the funeral." "The funeral is over. Your mother was buried 6 hours ago. And 23 people may lose their salaries in 11 days. Naomi looked at the agreement. Her name already appeared beneath Jiho's, leaving only the red stamp from her registered seal. "I'm not signing tonight." Jiho closed his eyes. "Of course not. This is our home. I need an independent attorney to review it. You never needed an attorney before refusing me. I refuse to pressure a sedated woman. You protected her until the end." She needed protection. From her son? The question entered the room more quietly than a shout. Naomi saw the exhausted man beneath his anger. She remembered him sitting in the car with his forehead against the steering wheel. She knew his employees had trusted him. She knew shame frightened him more than failure, but understanding his fear did not make the documents safe. "Jiho, I am not your enemy. No, you're worse." His voice cracked. "You stand beside me, watch everything collapse, and call it principle." He said Sun-hee had spoken to Naomi about this house, while refusing every honest conversation with him. Naomi answered that he had brought contracts whenever his mother asked for a son. Neither statement was entirely fair. Both found their target. "You were in every room," Jiho said. "Every appointment, every decision. By the end, she looked at you before answering me." "I was there because you weren't." Naomi regretted the sentence immediately. Jiho stared at her. "I was trying to keep a company alive. And I was trying to keep your mother alive." Silence filled the apartment. Jiho walked to the hall cupboard, removed Naomi's empty suitcase, and placed it beside the front door. "I can't look at you without seeing what she chose," he said. Naomi waited for him to move it. He lowered his eyes. "Go." 9 years of marriage ended without broken glass or raised hands. There was only a suitcase standing upright beneath the coat rack. And Naomi packed clothes, her passport, and Sun-hee's sewing kit. Her drafting tools remained beside the desk because her shook too badly to fit them into the case. At the elevator, Jiho said her name. She turned. He gripped the doorframe. For a moment, she saw an apology forming behind his pride. Then his phone vibrated with another bank alert. The elevator doors closed before either of them spoke. Naomi walked through Gangnam until the rain stopped. She passed 3 hotels without entering. Asking for a room felt too much like admitting she no longer had one. Near dawn, she finally opened a booking page. Her phone rang. "Naomi, this is Seo Mira." Naomi looked at the time. "It's not 6 yet. I know what happened at the apartment. Did Jiho call you?" "No. Your access code to the building was deactivated at 6:41 last night." Naomi said nothing. Mira continued, "Do not book a hotel. Bring your identification, Sun-hee's sewing kit, and whatever belongings you have with you." "Why?" The will is read at 10, but one instruction takes effect before then. Naomi tightened her hand around the suitcase handle. What instruction? Come to Haneul House immediately, Mira said. The gates now belong to you. At 9:58, Naomi entered Haneul House's dining room carrying CO Mira's sealed folder. Jiho was already there. His funeral suit had been replaced by a gray jacket, but he had not slept. A paper cup of coffee stood untouched beside him. When Naomi placed the 7 brass keys on the table, his eyes fixed on them. You have access to the house? I learned that this morning. And you came here before the will was read. Mira told me to. Jiho looked toward the attorney. Did my mother arrange that too? Mira opened a document case. Your mother transferred immediate occupancy to Naomi upon her death. The remaining provisions are what we are here to discuss. Jiho gave a short, exhausted laugh. So she prepared for my wife to move into my family home before I knew what she had done. Naomi felt the inheritance taking shape around her like an accusation. I didn't ask for this. No, Jiho said. You only spent 7 years becoming the person she would give it to. Mira placed a certified document between them. Park Sun-hee had left Naomi legal title to Haneul House, its eastern garden, and the textile archive stored beneath the west wing. The property had been independently valued at 54 billion won, nearly $40 million. Jiho stopped reading. Naomi continued until the words blurred. She had imagined anger, but not the shame that came with receiving something Jiho had wanted all his life. There must be another page, she said. There are 43, Mira replied. The mansion was not an unrestricted inheritance. Sun-hee had registered a preservation covenant against the property. For 20 years, Haneul House could not be sold, divided, demolished, or pledged as security. Within 18 months, the West Wing converted into temporary accommodation for unpaid family caregivers. Residents would be offered private rooms, meals, counseling referrals, and uninterrupted rest, while trained professionals cared for their relatives elsewhere. Naomi recognized every line: the accessible bathrooms, the shared kitchen, the separate garden entrance. Even the fabric workshop appeared exactly where she had drawn it. Jiho turned toward her. You designed this, years ago. Your mother asked what the unused rooms could become, and you never told me. She told me not to. You kept plans for my family's house secret while I was trying to save my company. I thought they were ideas. I didn't know she was turning them into legal instructions. Jiho pushed back his chair. You expect me to believe she independently decided to give you a $40 million property built around your drawings? Naomi had no answer that would not sound defensive. Mira did. Your mother met with me 5 times without Naomi present. 2 physicians separately confirmed her capacity. The covenant was reviewed by an independent preservation specialist, and every signing was witnessed. Jiho looked at the date on the final page. It was 3 weeks before Sun-hee died. She could barely walk. Her legs were failing, Mira said. Her judgment was not. Naomi read the remaining conditions. Haneul House would undergo annual independent audits. Revenue from carefully limited cultural events would support the caregiver residency. Naomi could draw a salary as its director, but she could not take loans against the property or convert it into a private commercial residence. If she declined the inheritance, the mansion would pass to a heritage foundation. It would not pass to Jiho. His face became still. She found a way to reject me even after death. This document is not a measurement of love, Naomi said quietly. He looked at her. You sound like someone who received the house. The sentence hurt because it was true. Naomi turned to Mira. Can I postpone accepting it? You have 30 days, and until then, you retain occupancy and temporary administrative control. No one can mortgage, lease, or alter the property. Jiho understood the consequence immediately. Haneul House could no longer rescue his firm. I'm contesting it, he said. Mira nodded as though Sun-hee had predicted those exact words. That is your legal right. I want every medical record, every visitor log, every message between Naomi and my mother. You may request them through counsel. Jiho gathered the documents, then noticed a smaller case at the bottom of Mira's bag. Inside it was Sun-hee's silver voice recorder. A strip of white paper crossed the lid. 2 names were written in Sun-hee's precise hand, Naomi and Jiho. Naomi reached toward it, but Mira closed the case. Your mother gave specific instructions. Neither of you may hear this alone. What is on it? Jiho asked. I was not authorized to listen. When can we? Only during confidential mediation, after both parties review the independent evidence and agree that the recording will not be used publicly. Jiho studied the recorder as if his mother were still controlling the room through it. Then he looked at Naomi. I'll attend the mediation, he said. Not because I trust this process, because I want to hear what the 2 of you planned. He walked out carrying a copy of the will, but leaving his coffee untouched. Naomi remained beside the table. The mansion belonged to her now, at least on paper. Yet, the first thing it had given her was not security. It was the full weight of Jiho's suspicion. For days, Naomi lived in the caregiver's room while lawyers argued over the remaining rooms. Jiho's counsel requested a freeze on the inheritance. The petition claimed Sun-hee had been dependent on Naomi, isolated from her son, and vulnerable to influence. It suggested something harder to disprove than forgery, that years of care had made refusal impossible. CO Mira delivered the evidence in 6 numbered boxes. Sun-hee had met Mira 5 times while Naomi was away. 2 taxi receipts showed she traveled alone. At the final signing, 2 physicians interviewed her separately. One asked her to explain the covenant in her own words. Sun-hee's answer was attached. The house must never again be used to purchase obedience. There were recorded interviews, handwritten revisions, and letters to heritage organizations. Sun-hee rejected One Foundations because it wanted the textile room as a gift shop. She corrected operating costs and demanded privacy for every caregiver accepted into the house. Nothing in the files sounded confused. The evidence could defeat Jiho's challenge. It could also expose him. One folder contained the ground lease proposals, lender warnings, and the document he had placed beside Sun-hee's bed while she was sedated. A nurse had recorded the time. Another file showed that Jiho had asked how quickly a preservation covenant could be challenged after death. If this reaches court, investors and reporters may see it, Mira said. Naomi imagined the easy version of justice. She could release every page and let strangers reduce Jiho to the worst week of his life. He had thrown her out and called devotion manipulation. These records would prove that she had protected Sun-hee when he tried to use her weakness. For several minutes, that possibility felt like relief. Then Naomi found an old photograph beneath the files. Jiho was 13, standing in the eastern garden with a model house in his hands. Sun-hee faced the camera instead of her son. On the back, in Jiho's handwriting, were 6 words. She said it was nearly good enough. The mansion remembered both of them. It held Naomi's years of care, but also a boy who learned that approval was always one achievement away. That did not excuse the suitcase beside the door. It explained why Jiho kept trying to turn buildings into answers. Naomi closed the folder. I want confidential mediation. Submit the capacity evidence, but hold the company records unless they become legally necessary. That removes pressure that could make him withdraw, Mira said. I'm not trying to make him surrender from shame. What do you want him to understand? That the house was never the answer to the question he was asking. Naomi signed the confidentiality proposal that afternoon. She also accepted the inheritance. Her first act as director was not moving into the master bedroom. She ordered an independent survey of the West Wing and a professional review of the residency plan. For the first time in years, people wanted her judgment instead of her availability. That evening, she entered the archive beneath the West Wing. Shelves held fabric samples, household ledgers, and property records dating back 4 generations. At the bottom of an inventory list, she found an entry absent from her copy of the will. Article 4, Personal Bequest to Jiho Parks, sealed materials and designate its asset. Naomi carried the list to Mira. What did Sun-hee leave him? That provision is private. Does Jiho know? He was told a separate packet required his signature. He assumed it was another explanation for losing the mansion and refused delivery. Mira unlocked a cabinet and removed a narrow blue portfolio worn at the corners. A small brass key was tied to it with faded thread. Naomi recognized the portfolio. Jiho had carried it in the garden photograph. Can I give it to him? He must choose to receive it. What does the key open? Mira returned the portfolio to the cabinet. Something Sun-hee protected from his creditors, his company, and even you. She turned the lock. The mansion was never Jiho's inheritance, Naomi. This was. The mediation took place 11 days later in Sun-hee's textile room. Jiho arrived with the blue portfolio. He had accepted the personal bequest, but had not untied its brass key. He placed it beside the silver recorder. Mira locked the doors. Jiho signed the confidentiality agreement first. The evidence established your mother's capacity, she said. This is the conversation she could not have while alive. She pressed play. After several seconds of uneven breathing, Sun-hee spoke. Jiho, you may believe I gave Naomi the house because I trusted her more than you. That is true, but not the whole truth. Sun-hee described the years after his father died. When Jiho disappointed her, she reminded him who controlled Haneul House. When he succeeded, she let him believe the property had moved closer. I called it motivation. It was control. I made my approval temporary so you would keep earning it. Then I blamed you for measuring love in property. Jiho stared at the recorder. When you brought the ground lease, I saw a frightened man asking for rescue. I answered by becoming the mother who frightened him. I rejected the paper, but never told you failure would not make you worthless. Then, Sun-hee addressed Naomi. You challenged me when obedience was easier. You took the pen from my hand when my judgment was clouded. I trusted you with Haneul House because you were willing to disappoint me. Naomi lowered her eyes. But I harmed you too. I accepted your care without insisting that my son share its cost. I watched your career shrink and called your sacrifice devotion. Do not honor me by continuing to disappear. The mansion does not mean I loved Naomi more, Sun-hee continued. It means she can protect the purpose we designed. Jiho, your inheritance is separate, because your life must become separate from this house. Mira nodded toward the blue portfolio. Jiho untied the key. Inside were his childhood building sketches and documents for a small brick drafting studio with a protected personal fund. Neither could be pledged to his company. They offered him a life, but could not rescue the business he had made his identity. On his first courtyard sketch, Sun-hee had written, "This was already good enough." I was the one who could not say it. Jiho covered his mouth. The recording continued. I cannot ask either of you to forgive me. Naomi, make the house useful. Jiho, build something you do not have to offer me. A mechanical click ended the message. No one moved. At last, Jiho said, she knew what she was doing to me. Yes, Naomi replied. Too late, but yes. And you knew none of this? Not the recording, not your inheritance. He looked at the sketches. I made you pay for what she withheld. Naomi did not soften the truth for him. I put your suitcase by the door. I canceled your access code. I wanted someone else to feel rejected because I did. I was wrong. Naomi's eyes filled. I forgive you. Hope rose briefly in his face. But I am not coming back. Is there any part of us left? There is a history. Perhaps one day there can be kindness. But I spent years making myself useful enough to believe I would not be left. I cannot return to a home where love became permission to stay. Jiho looked down. This time, he did not argue. He signed the notice, withdrawing his challenge, and authorized Mira to keep the company records private, unless a court required them. At the doorway, he paused. "I don't know how to save the company." "Then tell your employees the truth before the bank tells it for you." He nodded and left carrying the portfolio, not the mansion papers. The room offered no victory. Sun-hee's confession could not return Naomi's lost years, repair Jiho's childhood, or restore their marriage. But the legal fight was over. For the first time, Haneul House no longer had to prove whom Sun-hee had loved. It only had to become useful. 10 months later, lights appeared in windows that had been dark for almost 20 years. Haneul House opened its first caregiver residency on a cold Monday in November. The West Wing now contained 8 private rooms, accessible bathrooms, a quiet library, and a shared kitchen where residents could make tea at midnight without explaining why they were awake. The original timber remained visible. Sun-hee's textile patterns hung behind protective glass, not as decorations for wealthy visitors, but as reminders that fragile things could survive when people took the time to preserve them properly. Naomi no longer slept in the caregiver's room. She had resisted leaving it for 6 months. Then one morning, she understood that staying there had become another way of proving she needed very little. She moved into a modest room, overlooking the Eastern Garden, and converted the master bedroom into a counseling and consultation space. Haneul House employed nurses, respite coordinators, kitchen staff, and a counselor who had cared for her own father for 12 years. Naomi directed the residency 3 days each week. On the other 2, she returned to architectural conservation. Her first project was a neglected neighborhood library, whose roof had leaked for decades. The younger architects addressed her as lead conservator. The first time they waited for her decision, Naomi nearly looked behind her to see who they meant. Jiho's company did not survive unchanged. He told his employees the truth before the lender could do it for him. The firm entered restructuring, sold 2 unfinished projects, and released nearly half its staff, with severance funded by Jiho's remaining personal assets. There was no miraculous recovery, only meetings, apologies, and consequences. He began working from the small brick drafting studio Sun-hee had protected for him. Instead of luxury developments, he designed renovations for aging apartment buildings and neighborhood shops. His name appeared less often in business magazines, but the buildings were completed. Naomi heard these details through Mira. She did not ask for more. On the morning before Haneul House opened, the gate intercom sounded. Jiho stood outside, holding a long wooden case. Naomi met him in the entrance courtyard. "I found these when I cleared the apartment," he said. Inside were her drafting tools, brass dividers, measuring pens, a scale ruler, and the mechanical pencil she had used before her career narrowed into medical schedules. Jiho had cleaned each one. "I should have brought them sooner." "You brought them now." He glanced toward the West Wing, where staff were preparing the rooms. "May I see what you built?" Naomi considered the question. "Not today." Pain crossed his face, but he nodded. "All right." She waited for him to argue, apologize again, or ask whether enough time had passed. He did none of those things. "I hope it helped people," he said. Then he returned to the gate without requesting entry into the house or into Naomi's life. That afternoon, the first resident arrived carrying a canvas bag and 3 missed calls from home. Mrs. Han had cared for her husband since his stroke and had not slept through the night in 4 years. At the entrance, she apologized for bringing too little clothing, for arriving early, and for needing help at all. Naomi recognized the habit of making exhaustion sound like a personal failure. "You don't need to earn your room," she said. She carried the bag upstairs and opened the final door in the West Wing. Morning light spread across a wide bed. Beside the window stood a chair, a kettle, and nothing that required Mrs. Han's attention. "Who do I need to check on?" the woman asked. "No one," Naomi replied. For the next 2 weeks, someone else is checking on you. Mrs. Han entered slowly, as though rest were a place she had forgotten how to visit. Naomi placed the wooden case containing her drafting tools beneath her arm and opened the curtains wider. Outside, Seoul moved beyond the garden walls. Inside, Haneul House no longer measured love through ownership, sacrifice, or permission to stay. It offered a room, a locked door, and the morning light. If someone in your family has become so dependable that nobody notices the cost of their care, ask them what rest would look like. And remember that forgiveness can release the past without restoring someone's access to your future.